Welcome back. One thing I forgot to say that I was kicking myself all during the first part of this program was to say thank you, especially to all the poets. Of course, there wouldn't be any Poets Corner without the poets. And we're really so grateful to them for participating and for lending us their works. And what we hope, I didn't say the goals that we have for this exhibit, which is to introduce our visitors to the museum to poetry as a form of artistic expression, and to let visitors of our Middle Georgia audience know about the poets of Middle Georgia. That's a very important part of putting it into context, because we want our audience to understand how the context enhances meaning, and they will have a greater appreciation for poets of Middle Georgia because they're from Middle Georgia. So we're excited about having so many, and we feel really rich to have so many poetic talents connected to our region. And several people said to me during the intermission that they liked Stephen Bluestone's idea about doing this again, so we'll have to do that. Thanks to all of you poets for participating. We really appreciate some of them came from some distance to be here. In the second half, we'll be having Judson Mitcham, Anna Holloway, Tal Birdsey, Kevin Cantwell, and Seaborn Jones. And if y'all would just come and introduce yourselves as you start. Let's start with Mr. Mitcham.
I'm Judson Mitcham. I want to begin by saying something that most of you will know, if not all of you, and that is how much Adrienne Bond means to the poetry community in Middle Georgia, and she has really been the heart of poetry here for quite a while. I think the acknowledgement that she was given early on, not only for the excellence of her work, but for the integrity of her person, is entirely appropriate, and I hope that if indeed this does become an annual event, a festival, that her name will be associated with it. I want to read a poem because we're at Theatre Macon, for my daughter, who is associated with Theatre Macon. This is a poem entitled Rocking Anna to Sleep. She's 16 now, but she was 1 and a half at the time. Rocking Anna to Sleep. It was almost sorrow, what I used to know as a child, not wanting to drift off, hearing the even deep breaths of my brother, to whom everything was lost, the cracked doors lined with pure light, climbing the wall. Far down Church Street, a solitary bark catching on, even the cool pillow, its familiar smell. The small breaths of the girl failing in my arms grow slower and deep. She trails this worn blue nylon nightgown all over the house. She loves the feel of one button, but I know if I lifted her hand, it would easily open and fall back, free as a raindrop. The rocker's soft creak keeps time. I let it die, and perhaps she's startled by the change, or has gone so far in her dream she can say, by tightening her grip, when I pull at the gown, you are wrong. If you think there is nothing in the world you can always hold. This poem entitled Wonder. It can start with nearly anything, the delicate theme of a late-night talk show, or the desperate false laugh track of a bad sitcom. Sometimes I see us all sitting here, lulled off forever by a gas leak, and the TV still selling us deodorants and beer, selling lies about our lives. I want to turn from the dead screen, able to say, this life is a holiness. It is all we will have. I want to load us into an Oldsmobile with windows that won't roll up, upholstery musty from years in the garage. I want to ride washed with the summer air's warm velvet cloth. Ride to where the stars come clear, where the road goes from blacktop to concrete slab, sudden dirt. I want to trouble dusk for miles, till we roll to a hill overlooking a farm where a long gold light floats out in a field like a lost ray of sun, where the cattle lie buoyed by the earth, their heavy spines curving over hearts slowing in the drift towards sleep. I want to feel how the old car trembles and dances and kicks, trying not to die, then click the lights off, kill the engine, and listen to the tree frog, cricket, and cicada staccato, the soft lows rising as in wonder from the darkness, as if asking repeatedly, what are you doing here? Why are you here? I want to read a poem that grew out of our poetry group, which met at Adrian's house and has for a decade now. Came from something that either Charlotte or Christina, one, reported, having to do with a man who had jumped off the Otis Redding Memorial Bridge. Didn't die, he just stuck in the mud, shallow. And then he got out and walked off. But that stayed with me, and for a while I was thinking about, well, suicide poem, but actually what it became was a poem that had to do with the Otis Redding Bridge. And then it became a poem that had to do with poetry. I see this as sort of an ars poetica. Poetry is not all sweetness and light. Sometimes it's grit and spit. But there is light in it as well. I went out, as poets need to do, and stood in the place that I was going to write about, the Otis Redding Bridge. Poetry is very soft-spoken for the most part, and we're all very dignified and civilized. But underneath this, there is a desire to shout, a desire to sing, and that is what this poem says in part. On the Otis Redding Bridge, Macon, Georgia. This morning, when a woman walks home from the graveyard shift at the cotton mill, when she comes to the Otis Redding Bridge, coughing and turning her head so the snowflake dust on her shirt whirls off through a sheer gold sleeve the early sun lays across the road, what I need is the voice of Otis Redding, and the power that would let a man shout, sanctified, tender and sad, let him cry, angry yet shocking in his praise. I want to sing the cotton dust caught in the sunlight, and the woman who is not slowed down in the least by the momentary beauty that began as an old pain deep in her lungs, this woman who spits off the bridge and goes on. I'd like to read a couple of poems about my parents. My father's been dead for, will be 7 years. Soon after his death, I found that everywhere I went, I thought about, I felt as if I were looking through the eyes of my father. This is entitled A Postcard to My Father. Alone in a strange place now, I often think of you. And when the meeting broke early here in Jacksonville, I walked back alone to my room, made a drink, then relaxed on the balcony, the sea indigo and palm leaf green, whitecaps far beyond the waves. I lay across the bed, and then the dark surprised me. I hadn't meant to sleep. At dinner, people talked about the storm. They had gathered at the windows of the bar for the arteries of light branching out, for the rain boiling silver on the asphalt, for the palms bending low. You should have seen it. They told me more than once. You should have seen it. When someone we love dies, we're sensitized to everything around us. We're sensitized to every word every look. At least that was my experience. And so at the funeral home, I heard every word. I thought about those words. I thought about my own words. And this is what a poet does. The last words that I heard my father say, and the last words that people said about him, the title of the poem is Last Words. An old woman stands at the casket. Don't be look natural, she asks. I think about the phrase of natural causes, how it indicates a different kind of violence. I do know what she means, and both of us admire the awful craft of the worst undertaking in the world, the taking under. She turns from his petrified face, raised on her tiptoes. She whispers in my ear, I thought so much of your daddy. Odd, I didn't really think of him at all. Or so it seems now, that he's a riot in my head. And everything he gave me, which was everything he had, I took that as a given. Only Saturday we talked on the telephone a while, but I can't remember what he said. One poem of celebration and one poem of mixed celebration and lament, and that would be what I'll end with. My mother taught me how to dribble a basketball, although my father claimed that he did. My mother did it. I remember it well. I remember the morning it happened. So this poem is entitled Touch for my mother. You stepped out the back door, drying your hands on the plain white apron and watching me slap the new basketball down on the driveway's nearly flat hard pan, unable to control it or to stall for long its falling still. You held out clean, wrinkled hands for the ball, let it drop and caught the rise with the fingertips, never with the palm. Allowing no sound but the ball's hollow bounce, crouching low, either small hand moving with the ball. And years later, when the Newton County Rams came down like the cavalry at dawn on a few shy hand in a hot breath man-to-man press, the best plan was to get the ball to me. Even now, I return to that late fall morning when you taught me what a softer touch could do, how to go where I needed to, never looking down. The last poem is about the first time that I went back to church with my mother after my father's death, and about standing there with her and singing those hymns. It's entitled In the Sweet By and By. I had seen the earth open and close, the golden ash of pollen wash away each thin copper spine of broom sage bending in the dawn as if burdened by the shining of the sun. I had stared at the dirt, tried to reason what it meant if the moon flared white on a wet tin roof, if the clover bowed waving in the wake of every car, if the petals of the dogwoods fell. I had sat drinking coffee in the all-night diner with one good question for the universe. If people still joked at the counter, if the hot grill hissed like rain, if the rain fell softly in the parking lot. Like a slow child puzzled by a story's end, I had kicked up dust to watch it float. I had stumbled out stunned some days like a boy still lost in the afternoon movie, unprepared for the late sun burning in the street. But when I stood with my mother in the church, a month since we had left him in the earth, when the years swirled back like weather there, where the windows thrown open in July long ago brought creosote and pine smells, freshly cut grass, let the truck's low groans on the highway rise with every old anthem, every prayer. Where revivals once built all week like desire. So the quiet in the worship hall crackled, bristling with a charge as if fire might arc between the word and the not yet saved. where the preacher lay in everlasting wait on the one final stanza we would sing, where he pleaded with the lost until the yawn of eternity began with the hymn's last note, where I stood with my mother in the back row now, found the melody and followed it as though there were nothing else to do, and when I heard the alto my mother used to sing at the ironing board, or working in her flower bed, or standing at the sink, each note told the truth. Though the days break new in a mockingbird's throat, and a gauzy mist stalls above a creek bed, spins as if conscious of its body in the light, though a dying man can't help laughing at a joke, so he rocks in his own wasted arms. And a rain cloud leans like a barn set to fall while the wind starts to whistle in the wires. And though a woman lies back on the loading dock waiting for her ride while the sky turns red, and a girl leaving work at the truck stop walks toward a greasy strip of grass beyond the parking lot, as the breeze cuts across the wisteria, its smell mingled with the diesel and the smoke. Though the boys looking hard for a lost ball pause for the brief wild sugar of the honeysuckle, and a galaxy will whirl through the wilderness like an oak leaf, wheeling toward a roof, and even though the clover and the dogwoods bloom, we become nothing. Not the actors in a dream, not the mist, not a new stone lowered into earth. We are like the hymns once played on the out-of-tune piano in the living room. Harmonies defined by the family that stood there, versions no one else will ever reproduce. Sunday morning, as we struggled through the chorus, there it was, still, in my mother's soft alto, an old promise in her voice. Thank you.
I'm Holloway. I grew up in Ohio and Minnesota and Illinois and a little bit of Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. And I've been in Georgia for a long time now. And I can remember many times driving down State College Drive in Fort Valley and asking myself, exactly how did I get here? Because it's different from the latitude in which I was raised. But I realized that one of my aims in life, and at one point I thought I wouldn't be able to do it, was to be a writer. And I couldn't have been more fortunate than to have ended up here. And I would like to say thanks especially to the people who are my mentors, because I didn't do it at college, I did it when I was old. My mentors would be Adrian Bond and Seaborn Jones and Judson Mitcham. Without their support and basically teaching and suggestions and help, I wouldn't have been able to develop as far as I had, and I intend to keep trying to get better. I actually have a poem about Seaborn. We had poetry group at his house one time, and he lived on Georgia Avenue, and it was amazing. He had a desk which supposedly was Sidney Lanier's desk, and that made a big impression on me. Sidney Lanier's desk is solid and low, indicating that his legs sprawled easily from a low camp stool, or that the native Macon poet and other men in Civil War times were short. Nothing reasonable could break that desk. The fluted legs are posts, the surface broad, and the sides uniformly thick. So it stands in Seaborn's house today, asserting its weight. In place of oil lamp, blotter, and ink, it supports newspapers, a broken royal, and sales orders for industrial soap. Seaborn's odyssey came after a war. He went west to Berkeley, then back to work. He is a tall poet and owns no low stool. The desk is less in need of restoration than his house. Each day he walks his dog on Georgia Avenue, then goes home to write. One of the things I used to bother these other poets about all the time was that they had all these wonderful, deep Georgia roots that they could write about, and I was saying, well, I came from all these different places, and now I'm transplanted, and it isn't fair. But I've gotten over that. This poem is about my grandmother, and she would certainly constitute an important part of my roots. She was a very strong figure. I can hear her yelling at my father, which I thought nobody was supposed to do. And what she was yelling at him about was whether he ate meat and smoked cigarettes and so forth, because she had become a vegetarian and a health enthusiast in the middle of her life. So this is called, and this is a link that I have with Adrian, Tina, and Charlotte, because my grandmother was Swedish. And the poem is called An American Romantic, in memory of Emma Holt Wallace, born 1879, Carver County, Minnesota, died 1974. At about the time the 20th century began, my grandmother painted from a picture in a book a long-haired woman reclining in a small flat barge, the horizon behind her yellows, a foil for the burnished silhouette, a figure of romantic times. An accomplished lady, you say? My grandma was, but not in a Boston parlor or among English tapestries. The fire she sat by kept a wood farmhouse warm. Andrew's second wife had the girls, Emma, Esther, Alma, Alice. They must have weeded the garden, swept dairy and farm hut, must have soaked and smelled the Christmas lutefisk, eaten bread and potatoes when the winter was hard. In summer sun, Emma's picture was made, her piled hair shining to put in the manuscript for East Union Lutheran Church. The book also names founders' sons and daughters, makes record of journeys from Gotland, Västergötland, or Illinois and St. Louis, and honors my Swedish great-grandfathers, veterans of the Civil War. Now grown, Emma packed books and dresses in her trunk and boarded out to teach the blonde children, some of the boys bigger than she, heavily accenting their new English words. The year she was 30, Emma wed my grandpa, Caleb Walter Wallace, a farmer and a fiddler. In his church book picture, he is slender and dark. He built a house Minneapolis grew around, and Emma placed her painting in it above the piano. She schooled their sons. She swam at the lake in summer. She heard edifying lectures, and she decided to adopt the vegetarian philosophy. My grandma Wallace gave me lecithin and kelp. She played the piano to Away in a Manger. She gave me her leather-bound Hiawatha and the shores of northern lakes. Only now I know that Emma Holt, who painted the woman dreaming on a barge, did what there was in life for her to do. I felt it was only fair to write about my mother's side of the family too, and this is just a short poem about something which interests me, about how things that we've experienced in the past visually and with our other senses remain unchanged in our memories. So in a way, we're still children, even though we're old. And this is called Waterville, Ohio, 1955, and it's about visiting my other grandmother. Venetian blind stripes pass across the whatnot, the porcelain china lady, the World's Fair salt and pepper. They tip the bedposts, once each go. After each strobe has passed, tires lick the pavement below. One time a night, a train whistles, clacks and clacks. It is gone. Grown-up voices rise and fall in the next room. The sounds in the disembodied light lift away, diffuse the edges of the child's circle. The child, with eyes awake, ears open in the strange family bed, will carry the moments unchanged through years. This poem was an exercise, but it turned out okay. I finally learned to love Walt Whitman at a late age. I was too snobbish to like him when I was in college. And so I tried to write a poem in that vein and limit it to smells. And it kind of mingles the past and the present, old and new. My grandmother's life is in my house, soap left in towels, herbs worked into covered wood. The pine in a friend's yard releases the smell of my northern home. I smell Vicks Vapor Rub, Campho-Phenique, bacon frying, hamburger stirred with onions turning clear. Fresh corn ears are steaming, grass is cut, black moist dirt is turned over in the spring. I smell the oil in Uncle Harley's shop when I was 9, petroleum soaked into my candy cigarettes. And I smell shoe polish for brown or black Sunday shoes. Peach orchards, after picking's done, have a vinegar rot that must be lived through. Honeysuckle along the road beckons to me sweetly. My child snatches blossoms off to suck. Summer in Georgia is peppery hot, palpable damp, releasing seeds, pollen, sweet perfume. I smell fried chicken on every corner in town. Junipers around the courthouse that stink like urine. My own children's school, it's like shriveled fruit or gym clothes left unclaimed. In the rainstorm breaking 99-degree heat, I smell another autumn coming. This poem is kind of interesting because I thought of it because of something a friend told me that her husband does when she talks to him in great detail, with much emotion, trying to get him to understand and sympathize. He's extremely polite, and then when she gets finished, he says, would you care to have a sandwich? And so it's, I guess, about the difficulty of reaching each other with communication. The husband is, like me, a Midwesterner. Maybe that's the problem, I don't know. But it is interesting that this poem was accepted by a magazine way up there called Plainswoman. So I guess maybe they understood what I was talking about. The sandwich. Coffee's getting cold, she says. She inhales steam from the heavy cup, and the taste doesn't meet the promise. She holds the warm blue earthenware between her hands. He stands, feet wide apart, pottering in the kitchen. The stem is cleaned, the bowl is scraped. He fits his pipe back together. Beyond small square panes, she sees his garden, dried weeds, brown stalks, beans left on vines. She hadn't saved the plants from overgrowth this year, or herself from regretting his loss. Sweet pipe smoke moves around her. He clears his throat. She thinks of his manuscript, gathering a season's dust. She swallows a mouthful of coffee, then asks, "You want to talk?" His feet shift a step. He says to her, "Care for a liverwurst sandwich?" I hope I'm not taking more time than I should. This is a visual poem about something I love about the South, but ironically, it's new to the South. It's about cattle birds or cattle egrets, and it's called Egret Immigration. Immigration is a brave act to leave the familiar, to manage every ordinary day in the new. In this peach and soybean country, we have long-legged water birds who wade in the cow pasture grass. In my weedy garden, a lone white cattle bird treats himself to a frog. He captures it with his long beak, throws back his head, gums the spread-eagled frog repeatedly, dropping it and taking it again another way until it is gone. At spring plowing, they do the thing blackbirds do, float in at the smell of spring's cut sod. 100 white brush strokes settle on a dark swath. Rear ranks flap up, wheel, descend through reddish haze to fresh earth behind the machine. Whatever blackbirds seek at this spring celebration, our new cattle birds do too. Precious morsels, probably insects or worms. But imagine field mice uncovered, lizards or snakes. Whatever in farmland will serve for the shrimp or marshland swimmer, these stork-like fellows consume at home. Once I saw a gang of them in late afternoon cover a country oak, bold white swatches transforming the gray old tree. They come from Africa, and stalking Georgia cow pastures they make do. This poem is a poem of three things which are parallel to each other, which is a problem, but by explaining it, it won't be a problem. The first part really has to do with when I was a teenager and my parents bought a nice lot in town, but it had a very run-down little house on it. And so we, which means mainly my father, tore it down. When I had my own family in Macon County, and we needed a room for the boys, my husband tore down a house in Macon and brought the wood because it matched the kind of boards that were on our house, the kind of siding, and he built a room for them there. The third part is about another house that's not in my family at all, but one which I saw every day driving in Macon County. And the poem is called Artifacts, and you will see a relationship among them. 1. An old man and woman moved from the house suburban homes had grown around. Tearing it down, new people found the walls covered with newspapers displaying hats and liniments sold before World War I. A nickel fell from a door frame wrenched apart, and the woman had left behind a pair of shoes. 2. A father tore down an old frame house to get the wood, splintered and darkened, framing and joists, tongue and roof siding flecked with white paint. From it he made his children's room. Between flooring and wallboard, his older son placed a coin. 3. In a house so poor the wind came in through rotten boards, jars of peaches and okra filled wood shelves. When strangers came, the youngest girl would stand by a doorway hung with cloth to see them, eyes big in her gleaming face. A small hill of rubble is where that house was. A button, a spoon, a penny. I have one other poem, and it's not serious, and it's very short, and it came from a dream, and it may sum up my role as an adult female. It's called A Dream of Blue Fish. I am painting the living room gunmetal gray, and as I reach the second corner, the one already done forms a long cornucopia opening out and down. A shining blue goldfish swims out in his own misty vapor. I see on his body every scale and fin bone shimmering. I run to get water in a bowl. I scoop him from the air and place him in it to save him. Now a red one swims out, slightly larger, every scale and fin defined and gleaming, and I sweep my cupped hand through the air to save it, too. That's it.
Tal Birdsey. I knew that I was at a poetry reading in Middle Georgia when I went to Satterfield's for barbecue and hot-boiled peanuts before I came over here. I'm going to read first two poems are about the Ocmulgee River here. I consider the Ocmulgee River sort of a source for me, a place that's real intertwined with who I am. But this first one is about the river, and it's about my father and I going camping. The first time I ever went camping. It's called First Night Camping. In the dark through the trees, the river is running as surely as I can see my father's unshaven face, in the light of the fire and the glow of coals. By this light, I am not afraid. My father shows me how to make a rain of sparks fly upwards by banging coals with a stick. fire pours into the dark above our heads. Here's another trick, he says, drawing my stick from the fire and waving the glowing tip in the cold air behind us, making white traces of light, circles and lines which hang in the air for a second, then die. I take the stick and by that magic scrawl my name in the dark, but my letters won't hold, and so fall back into blackness. Yet I'm given power to make them come again, and I do, over and over, writing my name in the woods with my thin switchlight of a pen, with my father watching and knowing he has shown me what feats fire can do. Later in the tent, I'm awakened by low thunder, at first far off, then as close as I've ever known. Over the river, in the trees, above our smoldering fire, thunder is shaking the ground we lay upon. Then lightning comes, fire of another kind. In that light, our tent brightens, and for 1 second, all is clear. Boots, a box of food, bundles of clothes, all is revealed in a flash, and in the next flash, I see the bulk of my father's body turned away from me, extinguished in sleep, as though all life has been shot out of him. Yet still he breathes in the sound of thunder, the rain now pattering the leaves. From the coals and the fire comes a sizzling. In the dark, I trace his form with my finger. I write his name, my name, against the dark, against the moving river. I dream only that the bright letters hold. This second poem is also about the river, and it's, I have it as the Spring Street Bridge. You had it as the Otis Redding Bridge. I'm not sure which it is. It's called Dame's Ferry Blues. And this is about a canoe trip that I took. The only thing I really remembered about the trip was that I saw up in the tree this dead deer as we paddled down the river. It was after a flood, and this is really based on, I guess, not the flood, the recent one, but one in the early 70s. When I think of the first flood when I was 6, I remember how the river came up almost over the Spring Street Bridge. 3 weeks later, drifting from Juliet, we saw the wreckage firsthand. Broken chairs smashed against island heads, a flight of stairs hung up midstream, a white door, half stuck in mud, opened only onto water, the gold knob not turning, not held. Then 30 feet up, and the crooked wire of sweet gum, we beheld a drowned doe. Her hind legs wrenched from the hips, like bent limbs, twisting toward her snout. Her carcass was coal black, fur slick as oil, with flies feasting in the head, in the portals of her eyes, reveling in the cavern of her split trunk. I kept my eye on that storm-lynched animal, could have hung in the eddy staring all day, making of that corpse what I could, but the river wouldn't hold me there. Currents sluicing through the river's throat gulped us down stream like air, and so we floated on. That night on the sand flat by Lantern Lake, the river gave birth again. Fish rose to light, we lay upon the river, rising for the moon too, like newborns seeking mother's milk on the dark sheen of water. I saw her rise too, the doe, her black head swimming awake under stars. She'd come with me, blackening in my mind to a deep green bronze, like the glazed skin of fish, and she ripened in me the whole night long. I saw her sapling legs thrashing the rising current. I saw her drowning in torrents. Upriver, I saw her lost fawn, hanging in the spear tops of flooded trees. I saw my own face shine back from the sockets of her eyes. Small fry that I was, I felt the force of everything, even moths battering their paper skulls at the lantern's glass, and a suckered river pulling me down below the shoals. A frenzy of small hands, fingers reaching for the surface, for roots to cling to, reaching for air, for light. This is another poem that has to do a little bit with my father. He's a pretty mild-mannered man. He's scholarly, erudite, quiet, listens to Mozart and reads poetry. But when we were younger, he let us do a lot of illegal things. dangerous things, very irresponsible. And not only did he let us do them, he engendered the whole project. These were things that my mother never knew about, and we were not allowed to tell her. But this was his wildness, and he let us have it. One of the things we do is we drive down the country roads and lean out the window and throw beer bottles at road signs. But this one is about how he used to let us ride on the hood of the car on dirt roads, and sometimes we get up going pretty fast. We'd be clinging to the hood, and this is what this is about. It's called We Rode the Engine's Heat. He drove us toward the bluff, happily clinging for our lives. "Y'all can ride on front, but hold on tight," he said, before he pulled his head inside the car and pointed us towards the sea. We rode the hood of our Delta 88, small, fierce charioteers for a day, our fingers grasping for a hold, mirror, wipers, antenna, any metal thing to meld ourselves more fleshly to the car. As we spun our way down dirt roads, past fishermen's shacks, yard dogs and dried-up boats, rusted trampolines, live oak and palmetto, blasts of azalea and gasoline, the hot spring flood of heat and wind rushing in our eyes, fear and speed hurtling like quicksilver in the sun, until the bluff approached, or we approached the bluff. Then the marsh began to expand before us, a green Spartina glow, barrier islands in the haze. I thought he might not stop, and we'd go plunging through the air. I feared he meant for us to fly right off, a blazing, fast chrome fireball to sizzle in the tidal creek as he drove us toward the bluff, as we rode the engine's heat. This next poem, I'll just have two more. I served on the grand jury in DeKalb County last year. Serving on the grand jury was a gruesome experience. It was about for 8 weeks, 2 days a week, all day. We probably heard about 800 cases of the worst imaginable things you could ever hear, and every day we heard about 80 cases. And every day I'd go to the grand jury, and I'd go in at the courthouse in DeKalb County, and I'd go in at the basement, and we'd go up to the ninth floor, and we'd sit in that room for 8 hours and hear about these things. And at the same time as this was going on, my wife was pregnant with my first child, and every day I'd sit there listening to these stories about 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, and all I could think about was how had they gotten to this place, and had there ever been a time where horrible things weren't happening. And it was kind of disconcerting, it was dismaying, it was discouraging. And so as I would sit and listen to the cases, I would try to imagine where was the time when things were good and things were okay. And it was sort of me trying to think about my own son who was about to be born. Anyway, going up through these floors every day, I was going in this courthouse with all these cases and all these horrible things, and so this is a little bit about me trying to imagine going back to that first place, that beginning point where things are all right. It's called Wedding Cake. At the center of town is the courthouse, where the boy arrives at ground floor. In the guts of the building, he passes the guards and metal detectors, empties his pockets of coins, and so enters alone. From the bottom, he can only go up. The elevator opens before him, disgorging its passengers, a posse of manacled convicts. The boy looks away, then steps in the car, ready to ascend through the floors. The first floor is for violent offenders, murderers, rapists. The boy can barely open his eyes when the doors slide open, for he hears the thick sound of fists on bodies and sees the flesh-crowded halls. The second floor is home to all assault and battery cases. Less violent, yes, but here blood still stains the floor. The boy stands on the car with his back to the door. The third floor is devoted to white-collar crime, immoral acts that don't make the news. Balance sheets, tax files, sheaves of papers blow around like dry snow in the wind. The boy shivers and continues to ride to the top, as though rising up through a towering cake. Each time the door is open, the floor is smaller and he's higher up, and always under him, those layers of brutes pacing their cages. He keeps moving on to the fourth floor. Juvenile delinquents, petty sex offenders, men who walk the streets in women's underwear. Here, the boy can almost manufacture a smile. Fifth floor, traffic violations, fender benders, parking tickets. Light shines through the windows, and the judge either laughs or sleeps. Finally, the next to the last floor, the realm of shame and guilt. Here, no laws are on the books, but acts of betrayal, minor cruelties, selfishness, failure, these are on open display. Here are many unhappy souls wandering in ragged formation. One weeping man argues with his wife. A girl begs her father. A mother loses control and smashes plates of china. The boy feels hands reaching out for him, inviting him to stay as if this were an open house. But there is one final staircase leading to the very top, to the last round piece of pure white cake jutting above the world. The boy takes the stairs 3 at a time and discovers 2 figures, a man and a woman standing together under a trellis wreathed with flowers, holding hands and sipping wine. These are the boy's parents, and they are laughing and talking on the eve of their wedding. The boy cannot take his eyes off the movement of their lips, the way their words seem to hang in the air just before the breeze lifts them away. He watches his mother and his father in the new white fields of love, in the time before his birth, before the angers and resentments and regrets, before tragic patterns rooted them to earth. Here they are above it all, the boy, his parents, in the sky above the city, above the trees, his old house off in the distance, now brightening into view like the first star, light coming from the upstairs windows in a room he knows to be his very own. And this is the last poem. It's about my son, and it was the day or so after we brought him home, and sort of it felt like to me, it was the first time I had him when he was waking up in the morning, and to me it felt like this last moment of repose before his life began, and also before the fury of being a father for me began. It was this one last moment of quiet. It's called First Awakening, 5 a.m. In the dark room, within the dry, fresh painted walls we prepared last winter, by the window watching the sky drip down, an orange morning fog, black limbs outlined in mist, limbs spreading up and out and up, thinning like grape tines gone wiry, like dark veins. My little fresh flesh frog, my spawn, against my chest your hunched body wheezes, breathing out blurred dreams. Your eyes open onto this gray world, on what is given and what is taken away. Jays plucking worms from the flooded grass, the wet avenues teeming with the morning traffic, souls rushing to make appointments with what is left of time.
Cantwell. Part of the first line of this first poem is from the theorist Walter Benjamin. History is what hurts, someone once said, and what you must repeat if you fail that class the first time. Taking it again with others like you, who show up, pie-faced and unafraid, because the worst has happened already. That summer is spent, sitting behind a girl whose shoulders would darken as the weeks go by, so that you mistake for a pink strap the unburned skin of her back, as if you saw her shoulders while she bathed, as she raised 2 hands of water to her face, and then asked for you to hand her a towel. She is back freckles with August, as would a russet apple, muscling its place among the leaves. this second poem is a poem entitled Learning to Read. I don't remember writing the poem, except I remember writing the first 3 lines. I don't remember writing the poem itself. And I thought of that recently when I looked at this poem. It's a poem I like a lot, and as the poem itself has pleased me more and more as I watch my own son learn how to read, learn how to write, struggle with rote and the drudgery of the first steps of learning anything. Learning to read. It is forever and thoroughly wed to printing our first word, and maybe one letter backward in a penciled up first name. And it pleased us, that cozy rote all the same, and the cadenced pull of the King James. And in our circles, we took our turns to hesitate through dopey Dick and Jane. And then there was a stage of jokes only some knew enough to get. When apples were always more than apples, when getting it meant a certain fall from the literal to the between-the-lineness of it all. It was only a glimmer through a loose and slightly coarse weave of something other than our dazzled eve, robed in the off-color and silhouette. But we had our laughs and got the antecedent drift, and back to work. We worked the measure of that cursive it. When my son was born, one of my best friends, Ralph, kept saying to me, "You need to write a poem about that." And I would say, "I don't think so." Being one of those kind of people who don't think that you write a poem about everything, and that being one of the kinds of things that because people tell you you ought to write a poem on it, that you for sure should not write a poem on it. But of course I wrote a poem on it, mainly to shut him up. The title is Border States, and a couple of quick things. A kamikaze is a drink, and a flaming plane as it goes into an aircraft carrier. Those 2 things. And the border states of the Civil War, that's where the title comes. We got there casually and soon by drinking to my son, just born. And now it seems strange, almost wrong, to have kept on shooting down kamikazes while we tried to remember the border states of the Civil War. Missouri, especially, the paradigm. The guerrillas of both armies thieving horses, cooking rye in the steep hills, and wearing the traces, regimental trousers or a blouse of 2 causes. That was nearly what we were getting at. The edge or the center failing the union. So much gray, so much blue, and where they joined to fill out the dailiness of those years. And if not wrong, indulgent, for we shaped nothing to celebrate the new life but the fringe professions of the border states. Speculation on our part, in fact, which we romanticized to occur through the ethereal bare league of talking turkey. And in the meantime, in the end, we meant well, sensing beneath our rambling that largeness involved going beyond occasion and into the self-created abyss. The pilot, for example, guiding his zero into the burning carrier, to marry what was already dissolving, to become more or less, in much the same way that shot followed shot as we ordered and reordered what we wanted to take us over. We might have welcomed him with greater formality, the way the midwife had wanted it, when she told me the father, as she said, to cut him free from his mother. And how I let go of what I'd already decided, not fighting it, not caring that someone else's ritual displays what I would have preferred as she did. Later that evening, drinking and first to health, I thought that the art was not always found by rushing to consult the Academy of Weights and Measures, but by offering oneself to the great drift until desire or some other attraction found the shape of things, that old fine music, which moved the old story along, that all things cannot be taken or willed, but must be crept up on, white cubes of sugar in hand, a sweet long story to the large ears of the fearful, to be coaxed with smooth hands, like any happy soul, untethered from familiar darkness. This last poem I'll read, a very formal little poem based on a print by Durer entitled Adam and Eve. You know that story. And now they have already begun to go. In Albert Durer's piece, a little soft around the waist, she has at least, and slow to leave they must, as sand begins to sift inexorably through its narrow waist of glass. Her flesh grown thick, we take to be a sun. Those awful woods, untouched by a ray of sun, go still. Hence, this study and his early gloss of melancholia. Hence, her touching smile, which never fades completely, nor the leaves, which stay and free their hands for the small task at which they've grown so clumsy, and loves which sour by that cause, that which so divides, yet which of pleasure is not so devoid. Thank you.
If you take an orange, place it in direct sunlight, slice it into quarters, then remove the seeds and drop them into a small container about the size of an artichoke jar. Add food coloring, cover with aluminum foil perforated with pinholes, then put it in a dark place where no one will ever find it. You will discover that over a period of time, you know something that no one else knows. My name is Seaborn Jones, and I was born and grew up in Macon. I work with the Museum of Arts and Sciences now with animals. The Red Horse. When the woman in the museum looked at the Chagall, she said, "But what does it mean? I don't like art where the artist hides the meaning. Flying fish, man with goat's head, offering a bouquet of fireworks to an upside-down bride. Once I was pulled over by the police. I had laryngitis, and all I could do was make a sound like a cross between a goose and a foghorn. When I tried to write a note explaining my condition, I realized I couldn't spell laryngitis, and handed them a piece of paper that said, "I have Larry." They passed it back and forth saying, "What does he mean? What does it mean?" Maybe I should have handed them a drawing of a violinist with no head. Or like the clerk in the store, when I asked the time, responded, I don't know, I'm just hired help, then presented me with a peacock feather. What does it mean? Maybe there's a way to tell time by peacock feathers, something buried in the mythology of hired help. Circle of children pointing feathers toward the moon. I feel about the woman in the museum the way she feels about Chagall. What does she mean? What does he mean? The peacock spreads his fan of fireworks. It is time. The clothes make the poet. Dressed to ride in my red plaid pajama bottoms from Kmart and a t-shirt covered with seahorses that came from God knows where, unless it was the garage sale where I got the bathrobe monogrammed with the initial Q, which is not my initial. And because nobody dressed this way can think clearly enough to function, I begin to wonder why I look this way. Maybe it's because I'm a man and men don't know how to dress. Or maybe it's because I'm not enough of a man and I should go to the typewriter in camouflage and boots, my face painted with grease. Or maybe I should get an Armani suit. Dear Rita, this poem was written by a man wearing an Armani suit and a Rolex. Or was it a ski mask and a jumpsuit? Maybe I could wear a gorilla mask or a powdered wig. I could wear an evening gown or a dog collar. Anyway, getting dressed to write is like getting dressed to kill or to die. It doesn't much matter what you wear, like a man at a wedding or a funeral, looking down at his mismatched socks and either laughing or crying. Unemployed. This came after watching an awful lot of television. Daffy Duck throws his deck chair into the blue pool, tees off on a dynamite stick, featherless and smoking to the laughter of three mice in sombreros with guitars and maracas who planned it that way. Daffy Duck's problems aren't as great, however, as the Coyote's, who has just been hoodwinked by the Roadrunner, and who is just now realizing the light at the end of the tunnel is a nuclear blast. Channel 2, a car chases another car. Channel 4, a car and a helicopter chase a truck. Channel 6, a car, a helicopter, and a truck chase a motorcycle. Channel 8, a car, a helicopter, a truck, a motorcycle, 4 SWAT teams, and 6 black and whites with flashing lights chase a man on foot. On Channel 9, Mr. Rogers changes shoes. Tells me he likes me just the way I am. The Three Stooges on 88, after serving cornbread made from cement mix to the ladies of high society, fall asleep in a single bed, snoring at each other's feet. My daughter wants to know why they sleep with their shoes on. My wife brings me a hamburger with an olive eyeball. Wimpy reaches out of Channel 90, snatches it off my plate and swallows it. I run out the door into the street, which is turned into a tunnel, featherless and smoking, wishing everyone felt about me the way Mr. Rogers feels. the fly. Not knowing human movement to a fly would seem slow motion, she chased it room to room. She swatted a Venetian blind, a lampshade, her image in a mirror. When it got out of reach on the ceiling, she lay down to contemplate. But if she wondered if she had left a boiling pot. She remembered a doctor's appointment. She thought about her childhood, her parents, her marriage, her children. She started to cry, but there it was, on her knee. She would crush it against her body to kill it, but it was already across the room, flying in unpredictable patterns. Its aerobatics so elusive, they became an aerial blueprint of her mind. Faces, places, and numbers buzzing close but out of reach. The fly flew back to the ceiling. She lay down again, thought about nothing, and cried. The fly looked down through its compound eye and saw her in a mosaic. She didn't wait until afternoon. Too late for emergencies and doctors, too late for her childhood, her parents, her marriage, her children. Too late to cry and too late not to cry. She stared into the broken mirror and saw what the fly saw. Homecoming. You must go back home. You must face your mother and father. Even though you are older now than they will call you child, and you will speak as a child. You will ask why blue is sky, how green became grass, but their answer, as always, will come before your question, and they will have said no. And because no is familiar, it will make you feel welcome, feel at home. You must go back home. You must face your children. Even though you are younger now than they will ask for advice. But before you speak, they will have already responded, and they will have said wrong. And because wrong is familiar, it will make you feel welcome, feel at home. You must go back home. You must face yourself. Even though you are the age you are, you will ask yourself why blue is water, how green became eyes. You will ask yourself for advice, but your answer, as always, will be a question. And because not knowing is familiar, it will make you feel welcome, welcome home. I'm going to read one more poem. This is called I Feel So Good, I'm Changing My Name to James Brown. I'm sitting in a restaurant in North Platte, Nebraska. Sitting at the table opposite me is a couple, business executive and wife, vacationing west from Toledo, no doubt. The woman holds up a sign that says, going to Boulder. She flips it over and it says, want a race? Clean windshield and open road ahead, Jughead and Veronica in the rumble seat, and Jughead figuring time and mileage. Let's see. If Jane had 7 apples when Bob was 5 years old, how long would it take the train to go from Boston to Baltimore if you were 1 inch tall? Thank you.
of you all for coming again, and thank Jim Crest of Theatre Macon for letting us have the meeting here, and thank the crew, George Espy and Hill and Tosh Anderson and Pam and Leslie Preston for helping out to keep the tickets, sell the tickets, which there weren't any tickets, but take the money. And read one more poem by Fabian Worsham before we go home. This is Ossabaw, the Inspirational Island. Styx, you know the place, S-T-Y-X. Ralph can tell us all the mythology about it. But I'm just going to remind you of that because you can't read it the way I'm seeing it. I smiled when everybody thought I said, I'm from the Styx, when what I said was, I am from the Styx, S-T-I-C-K-S. Nobody could tell the difference. They were intellectuals, a biographer from New York, an art historian from Oberlin, a novelist from San Francisco who had never seen banana pudding. There was a painter from Limbo, Georgia, who would have talked like me but tried hard not to. Ashamed of himself, he walked around like a lost soul. One night at dinner, he said he'd seen a vulture, a raven, swooping down out of the sky, and I laughed to think he'd meant a turkey buzzard. That night, we slept like the dead. In the morning, we loaded the boat and went back home. Thank you all for coming. Be sure and come to the museum and visit the Holt Center.
It should be dot.